And I got questions too.
Cool. Well, we're live. Welcome to Office
Perfect.
Hours. I'm Nora Sto, and we provide practical advice to independent artists every other week. So welcome. If you're watching live, feel free to drop your comments in the questions. If you're watching after the fact, drop your questions in the comments. If you're watching after the fact, drop your comments below. Make sure you subscribe and share with a friend. But today we're talking about building your team. And as artists and entrepreneurs, I think there's so much around the mythology of like, oh, I did it by myself. I got here on my own. And that's a lie. And it's impossible. And none of us become successful alone. And you shouldn't have to. And so we're going to talk a little bit about like delegation and things like that. But hey, Sto, what's up?
How's it going? Yeah, no, I'm excited for this one because like you mentioned, there's the whole perception or mythology, whatever, that I did this on my own. But when we really get into it, it's almost impossible to do it on your own. So it's okay to lean on other people and ask for help and stuff like that. But we're gonna get into that for sure.
Yeah, and I think there's something even before we get into like how to find a manager, do you need a publicist or all that kind of stuff? I understand that for a lot of people, it feels so much easier to be like, I'll just do it myself. Mm-hmm. Because you can, right, there's an element of control. You don't have to trust anyone else. It's comfortable and it's easier, right? It feels emotionally easier to just be like, oh, I'll do it myself. I'll do everything on my own. The reality is it doesn't actually work that way. And when you bring in people who are good at the things that you don't like to do, or when you bring in people to have like a second pair of ears to listen to things or to see things that you might have missed, you actually end up with a better product or a better campaign or a better outcome in the end. And so as much as it might feel easier to just do it on your own, you actually often get better results when you have, and there's like scientific proof of this. Right? For like musicians, for example, who are like, I'll mix it myself and I'll produce it myself and I'll write it myself. You get ear fatigue.
Right.
And your ears are not going to catch the same things that a new person who's going to mix it for you, for example, might catch. And so there's actually like a qualitative difference to things. So I say that to say it might feel uncomfortable in the beginning to trust other people with something that feels like so close to your heart. But know that in the long run, it's going to help you do better. And that it's not always going to be perfect, and that's okay too. It takes a while to like build the right team or bring on the right people for you. So I want to kind of ground the conversation in that, is that I know it's not always easy to trust people, but that's part of scaling up and kind of building your music as a career rather than as a hobby.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, again, I just want to stress that you don't have to do it yourself. I think it's like you mentioned on the trust side of things, but I also think, when it comes to kind of outsourcing some of these things, it's like if you're going to be doing music videos, if you're going to be doing touring, if you're going to be doing this, all this other stuff, you're going to need some extra hands to just not burn out on juggling all that stuff. So it's creating a team not just for your success and stuff like that, but also to make sure that you really are able to focus on what you want to focus on as you're on your journey.
Yeah, and I think so. One thing to think about is team can be as broad or as limited as you want it to be. Right? So like team could be someone who's with you 24/7, who's brainstorming with you, creating with you. But team could also be the people that you hire. It could be the consultant that you bring on.
Exactly.
It could be the person that you have on call, right? And so team, I think sometimes we tend to think in like all or nothing terms, or like someone you have on like retainer all the time. And it doesn't have to be that way. So allowing yourself to figure out, so maybe this is a good place to start. People come to me all the time and are like, well, I need a manager.
Right.
Do you?
Right.
What is there to manage? But I think where that comes from is that's a title that folks are familiar with, but they haven't actually matched it up with like, what are the things that I need help with? So from a really practical perspective, what I always tell people to do is write down all the things that you need help with. Like make a list, and not just the things that you need help with, but like the things you don't like to do. Like the things that you never
Right.
want, right? If you don't ever want to answer an email again in your life, put that on the list. Or if you don't ever want to make a Canva Instagram post, put that on the list, right? You could do
Right.
it, but you don't want to. And then what you can start to do when you have this like big, long list of things is start to group the things that go together. So if you need help with like social media posting and design, that goes together. If you need help with answering emails and managing your calendar, that can go together. If you need help, whatever the thing, bookings and tour management, that could go together. And so rather than thinking of titles, think about tasks. And you can organize your tasks into then roles. So that will help you figure out what are actually the team members that you need that you can start to bring on. And from there, you can write out a job description that then will help inform your search process, that will then help you find like the right people to bring on. So that kind of backwards process is going to help you make sure that you're finding people that are a better fit for you, rather than saying, oh, I need a manager, but what you think a manager does and what someone else thinks a manager does are actually like not even the same thing.
Right. Exactly. And I wanted to go back to what you were saying about titles. Like, I think, especially again, and especially with the social media age, I feel like we can get so wrapped up in, oh, A&R and manager and, you know, booking agent, all this stuff. If you, like you said, if you take a second to really write down what you actually need, it kind of also allows you to kind of see past, I think, you know, and this is kind of how it's all set up, right? Like, I think when we see a verified check mark, or we see something like A&R or whatever, we start to have all these preconceived notions, and what can sometimes lead to misconceptions about what this person actually does, and, you know, their impact on that person's career and all this other stuff. So if you head into that conversation knowing what you actually want and need, then you can also go even a step further and talk about like qualifications and like what you know, what values that you want to have in that position, because I think that's super important too. You don't just want to grab someone that, oh man, they have a verified check mark and they work with such and such, and then turns out, you know, it's not the exact same for you specifically based on what they do or whatever. And next thing you know, you feel like you've gotten scammed because you relied only on a title versus actually doing your research. And I think we'll actually talk about, like, you know, you should be interviewing the people that you're putting on your team. We'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah, and what you just mentioned, right? We talk about, actually, if you go back a few episodes in our Don't Get Scammed episode, where like the verified and the check mark sometimes can be misleading. But this is also a reminder that when you start to build your team, you don't have to look up, right? You don't have to look for the clout. Look around you. I work with an artist who recently just brought on a lawyer onto the team from amongst his fans. She was like, hey, what do you need help with? And he's like, well, actually, these are the things I need. She's like, well, I'm a lawyer. Right. And so it wasn't that he was looking externally, right? He was looking horizontally and within his circles to see who's already there and how they can be used. Right. So I think that's another place where, as if you're focused only on titles, you're going to miss the people who are around you who can really help build you up. So maybe this is a good, so thinking about tasks instead of titles is probably step one. Step two is, where do you find those people and how do you bring them on? And I think the first step is to write a job description.
Right.
And write a job description where you outline things like how many hours people are going to work, when you outline things like what the process of work is going to be. Is it remote? Is it flexible hours? Do you have like scheduled meetings and co-working time? Is it real? Like, what's the kind of structure going to be? where you obviously outline tasks and deliverables and expectations, but also things like, can they quit? Can you fire them?
Right.
Is there a commitment? Who owns the materials that they create, right? How will you credit people? And I know sometimes when we get into this kind of conversation, it feels overwhelming because people are like, oh my God, I have to write a contract and I'm not good at that. Like, it can be so simple and so basic, but to
Right.
have it on paper so that you have a common conversation point, a common starting point when you're starting to work with someone, even if that person is your friend from back in the day, even if that's your cousin that you grew up with, even if it is your fan that has been down for you since day one. Having things, and we talk about this a lot in many of our episodes, but especially in the contracts episode, having things on paper lets you come to the table with a common understanding so that then you can build out processes and systems.
Right, exactly. And again, it's a team, so it is going to be supposed to be a team effort. So when you're we it always sounds great to work with the homies and to work with family and all this other jazz, but it ain't so hot when conflict strikes, or when and again, it could be literally anything. You'd be surprised like what affects other people. And so when you're in a team effort though, if they're on your team, you're supposed to be supporting them as well. It's not just support the artist. You as the artist also have to support your team. And so if it's not like if you haven't really figured out beforehand what that's supposed to look like, and what it looks like when conflict does come up, all of that can kind of spiral out of control into something that you can't really, it can be hard to like grasp on and handle at that point. So doing all this, all the boring stuff beforehand just sets you up for what, ideally is a better, I guess, like working relationship.
So you also touch on a important thing around like valuing your team. And one of the things that I hear a lot from folks is like, well, I can't afford to hire someone. And so what do you suggest though for folks who need help but don't have the budget to hire someone?
Well, we always talk about how like there are other ways to offer support. And I will say, like, when you are expecting someone to work for you so that you can get a profit, sometimes money is going to be the way that people want to be compensated. And if that's the case, that's fine. But on the other side of that, there are, and we kind of mentioned this earlier when we talk about networking, across and with people that are heading towards the same place that you are, you can exchange, whether it's services, goods, whatever. And at the most basic level, we talk about this, or we have talked about this, and like we see this happen all the time, like in music. It's just like when you work with a producer, it shouldn't be this one way, give me beats. Like it can be this actual relationship where both parties profit. Maybe you're actually tagging the producer in every single post about the record or something like that. That's just one way, again, to support. And again, like, to say that posting on social media or exposure or whatever, we've had that conversation before too. But again, if you're networking across, like sometimes that can work because you're both trying to get to the same spot where eventually when you're both paid, then you can have that discussion. But there are other, and again, if you're a photographer and you're working, obviously you can use that to your advantage. It really is about using your skills that you already have to potentially, use that as compensation if you don't have money or whatever.
Yeah. And this is part of when you're hiring, right? When you're like, okay, I need someone to help me with X, Y, and Z. You write your job description, you send out a tweet, you put a blast in your newsletter, you post it on Instagram, you look up maybe some of the college like internship or career center boards. These are all places that you can, right? You ask people who you trust if they know people. These are all places that you can advertise. You should be really transparent about if you're expecting people to work for free, if you're expecting people to, like, what the salary or budget range is. the more you're upfront about those kinds of things, the more you're going to find people who are willing to work with you versus people who are coming with different expectations. So you start to align the expectations. So if it's a manager is going to get percentage of your profits. So you don't need money up front to have a manager. They make money when you make money. Similar with like, you can create similar kind of profit sharing deals with like writers or producers or things like that. With other folks, you can do service exchange. But if you're doing service exchange, to be very clear about what that exchange is, right? So to say, you're going to give me 5 photos, I'm going to tag you 26 times across these different platforms and promote your next art, whatever it is, but to really be specific about those details. And so there is other ways to think of. So, when we say profit, it doesn't necessarily have to be cash value.
Exactly.
But it's about valuing people for their time, their expertise, and their energy. So the more you're upfront about that, the more you're going to attract people that are going to be aligned, as I said. I think one of the things that's also where I see people struggle is then how do you find the right person? And traditionally, we're so used to send me your resume, send me your cover letter, but that doesn't actually give you good information. And so this is where when you're hiring, you get to be choosy. You have to ask questions. Like you want to interview people, do your due diligence, like look at their portfolio, ask for referrals, like all of those kinds of things. But my favorite tip, and this is something I use all the time, I make amazing hires when I use this, is I don't ask for a resume. I don't ask for a cover letter. I don't care. It doesn't give me any information whatsoever. What I do is I create a really simple Google application form where I ask questions that speak to the skills that I'm looking for. And that's the other part. Once you identify the tasks that you need help with, you have to take a step back and think, all right, what skills does this require? Does it require graphic design skills? Does it require good writing? Does it require, technical savvy? Does it require ability to build relationships with people? What are the skills? And then you can ask questions that speak to that. And so for me, I use the application, and it really helps me see the people who are aligned and have the skills I want, who, like for me, writing is really important. So I could see if they're like using grammar and punctuation. And so taking some time to do that, I think is really, really important. Then you do interviews. And if any of you ever need interview questions, I have really good interview questions that, again, speak to the kind of relationship and rapport that I want with someone that's on my team. And then finally, once you hire someone, it's your job to train them, especially if they're coming on as like a team member, right? Someone who's like an assistant or someone who's going to do some like management type work for you. Even though they're coming in as like an expert, you want to spend some time training them and onboarding them so that they understand how you work, and you can then build up together. So those, I think, having a good job description, a good kind of application process, interview, and then training and onboarding is going to help you pick a team that's going to stay with you for the long run versus people who come and go. And y'all, like, sometimes it takes time to find the right fit. So if you find someone who realize it's not a good fit, that's also okay. That's not a failure. That's more information. Especially if you've never hired someone before, or you've never had staff before, or you've never had a team around you before. That's okay, because that's part of your learning process until you eventually find like the right person or the right people for you.
Right. And all I was going to say is that like it's okay to take that extra step to interview the person. Like we kind of mentioned a few times now, like just looking at someone's resume or going by a social media symbol or, again, preconceived, like, notions or whatever that you may have, doesn't mean that they're a good fit for your team. Even if here's the thing, even if it says 7-time Grammy winning producer and like all these crazy titles and all, even if it's facts, does not necessarily mean that that's a good fit for you. So it's okay to hop on a call or, whatever, and actually have that conversation. And, Nora nailed it with the interview questions, because then you can add your own personal like twang to it. If you're looking for something specific, even if you're looking, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a photographer, graphic designer, again, producer, engineer, you can add your own personal. Is this going to be, do you expect this person to be in the studio with you? Or are you expecting to have more of a long distance, working relationship or whatever? All these things you can kind of craft and put in your own interview, so that way you're actually getting what you're looking for and not just being like, all right, they're verified and they've worked with, XYZ, so therefore it has to be a perfect fit. Like that's not to say it can't work, but it goes better, and you're able to, again, actually have a relationship, not just, all right, you do this, I do that, and then, boom, that's it. It's something that you can evolve from. And then, it's not just one and done. Then you're working for years and genuinely climbing together. And then you're making money together and gaining fans together, et cetera, et cetera. But it really does come down to making sure that your team is working for you and actually fits what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's also partly like when you're in that interview process, you get to set the tone for what that relationship is going to be like. So if you come to the interview process and you're like formal and like fancy, that's the tone you're setting. For me, I look at the interview process. I want people to want to work with me as much as I want to work with them. So I look at it as a getting to know you process. And I tell people off bat, like, look, I'm not looking for the right answer. I want to get to know you. So just be honest. Right. And that changes the whole like vibe. And one of the questions I ask in all my interviews when I'm hiring is, do you see places where we might have conflict? And that tells me so, and if people can give me an honest answer, it helps us decide from the beginning, like, how can we navigate those things? It's also things like getting to know, and this can happen in the interview process, but it can also happen as you're onboarding. How do you like to communicate with one another? Are you going to leave voice notes? Are you going to text each other? Are you going to email each other? It's really about, once you build that team, it's on you as the kind of head of this company, right? As a musician, as an entrepreneur, you are the head of the company to create the systems and processes that are going to set people up for success. And so
she's not kidding. She did ask me, actually, before we started office hours, do you see places where we could have conflict? So she's not lying.
Yeah, it's actually a question I ask all the time when I'm collaborating with people, because if we can't talk about conflict, especially if you're working with people that you know, and now you're changing the dynamics of your relationship, you might be great, amazing friends, or you might love your cousin like to death, but they might have something in their personality that when you're working together professionally, just, it's no love lost, but there might be tension there. And so being able to say, actually, you know what, I have this concern, or hey, I'm worried about this, allows you to have that conversation up front, so that then you can preemptively solve it, right? Prevention is easier than intervention, so that then you can deal with it off top, rather than, like, as Sto was saying earlier, wait till some like crazy crisis happens or something.
And something's kind of guaranteed. I don't want to say, like, I'm not saying this like in the worst way, but like something along the way, something's guaranteed to come up. Not necessarily a point of, hardcore conflict. Like, even if it's something like a disagreement or whatever, like knowing how to navigate that and knowing how to make sure both parties are respected but also feel supported and stuff like that in moments of conflict is so important. So if that's not discussed beforehand and something goes crazy, next thing you know, you don't you're now in a place that you haven't discussed and haven't really talked about, and you don't know what's going to happen. And then, especially again, when you're thrust into a situation like that, anything can be said, anything can be, whatever. That's why we talk about contracts and agreements. Go watch those episodes. But that's why you really do want to make sure you know how to not just handle conflict, but like Nora said, also how to communicate through that conflict.
Yeah. So, so to kind of recap today's episode as we wrap up today, trust yourself to ask for help. You don't have to do it all alone. I also hear people who are like, well, they're going to come steal my ideas and stuff like that. That's so rare. And
it really is. It really is.
And if they do, no one's going to be able to do what you do the way that you do it. So if we're doing like a risk benefit analysis, the benefit of asking for help is way higher than not, so like really don't be afraid to do a real kind of like internal look at like, where are the places that I'm struggling? Where are my gaps? And use that to create a list of things that you need help with. Identify the skills that you want the people who are going to do those tasks. What are the skills they need? But also like, what are the characteristics and the personality traits that you want them to have? Like for me, it's mad important that people are values aligned. So I want people who are anti-capitalistic. You might want someone who's silly and fun at work. Like whatever is valuable to you, you can put that in the job description. Blast it everywhere. Tell your fans you're hiring. Tell your colleagues you're hiring. And then have an application process that makes sense for those skills that you're looking for. Take time to interview, take time to ask for references, and then onboard them with a contract in place, with clear expectations in place, so that you can set yourself up for success. And know that sometimes you're not going to get it right in the first shot, and that's okay. Right? Allow yourself, okay, thank you. I learned a lot, but this actually wasn't as good as a fit as I thought. Let me try something else, or let me try someone else next time. It takes time to find the right people, but essentially what you're doing is like over time, you're collecting people and you have a list of vendors and you have a list of consultants you can rely on, and you have a list of people who are like your go-tos. So yeah, y'all, this isn't work that we're meant to do alone. Like creative work is not solitary work, and creative business is not solitary business at all. And this is where, I do consulting, Sto does consulting. We show up because you need help. Like you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes it takes an outside person to help you see it or think about it differently or overcome your blocks. So, maybe that's like, I didn't mean it as a plug, but maybe that's a shameless plug to reach out to us and we can help you with stuff. But definitely don't be afraid to ask for help.
The only other thing I wanted to add on is like, just because they didn't join the team doesn't mean, or your specific team does not mean that they cannot help out in the future. Like Nora said, like if you're having good conversations, like sure, they may not be a good fit for your specific team, but who knows, down the road, like they may be able to help you out with something. And again, it's, people always talk about network, but like, that's what that is. That's what networking is when you're actually talking to people and building those relationships. And then, who knows, 2-3 years down the line, you call upon them and then it is a good time to work. Just because it's not a good time now doesn't mean it won't be a good time later. So, you have those conversations. And like Nora said, it's okay to be picky. It's your team. So, no one's going to ride harder than you. So it's okay to really be picky and understand what you want from your team.
Y'all, if you're watching this after the fact and have questions or comments or things, maybe you've hired and you have like best practices that work for you, please drop those in the comments so we can share them with the Office Hours community. Make sure you subscribe if any of this is valuable to you. Share it with a friend, like share it on Twitter, share it on the gram, share it in your newsletter. Part of, as I say, like if we start to change norms in the music industry, we all win. And so these episodes are part of how Sto and I try to do that. Like it, share it, comment, and for sure, do something kind for yourself, because it's the end of the year. I know y'all have been working so hard. Everyone's a little burnt and a little tired. It's starting to get cold and dark. So take some time today and every day to do something kind for yourself and something kind for others. And we'll see y'all next time. Thanks, everyone.
Drink some water. Get a damn website. Go Cavs.